Good morning, afternoon or evening, and welcome to the latest in my Tom 080 Top 5 series. This week we look at the top 5 hidden tips and tricks that you probably don't know. Now each of these is little known by all people basically, except the really top players, and they can really push your game up a level or two. So after watching this video, the chances are you're going to give yourself an advantage against an opponent who probably won't know the same tricks. So why don't we get into them? First up at number 5, and bear in mind these aren't really in any particular order by the way. You ever been on a water map and you've noticed that there's a key resource but it's just a stretch of water away? Well, have you considered using a fishing boat to allow you to access that resource while you're in phase 1? No? Well, when I learned about this hidden trick it blew my mind. See, it transpires that fishing ships can be garrisoned with a villager, so you simply load up a fishing boat with the villager, get the villager to build a dock near the mineral mine or whatever it is that you're after, and start collecting resources. And this can even be useful if you're actually playing on a migration map as well, because while your opponents are all still trying to get themselves to phase 2 in order to move across en masse, you could have scouted the entire mainland and used outposts to keep a view of key resources. It's just a great little trick. Flying in at number 4, we have the little-known cavalry speed upgrades. If you ever found that your enemy's cavalry just seem to be a little bit faster than your own, and they're causing untold damage to your economy, this could be the reason. So there are 2 upgrades available for the corral that increase cavalry speed, and as basically very few people ever use the corral, it becomes pretty obvious as to why these upgrades are also rarely taken advantage of. So the first upgrade's available in the town phase, and it will give your cavalry a 10% speed boost, and there's a second in the city phase that adds the same on top, and that means the compound, if you get both of them, is your cavalry will move at a not insubstantial 21% greater speed than your opponents. Now, to be fair, both are pretty expensive as they cost 500 food, 500 wood and 150 metal each, but having that extra speed available to your cavalry over your opponents can make a real difference, especially if you're using them as shock troops to run into your opponent's base, attack his farmers and get out of there. So whether you take these upgrades or not, nonetheless, it's worth knowing that they exist at the very least. Coming in at number 3, we have something that, if you're playing on random and you draw the Kushites, well, you'd be entitled to feel a little shortchanged, but this may cheer you up. So, while you're no doubt still going to rue the lack of bolt throwers or catapults, you do in fact have access to a unit that is able to deliver a reasonable amount of crush damage. It just comes from a surprising source, and that's the siege tower. Now, they're not generally thought of as the most useful of units, but they can actually prove very dangerous to enemy buildings. If you consider that each tower attacks with 2 crush damage, and that's a third more than a slinger, it means that when its 40 unit capacity is fully utilised, it can attack with the same crush damage as 53 slingers, which you'll know is a lot of slingers. Now, if you look at it like that, it certainly seems that siege towers are much more worthy of consideration than most people give them. They can take down smaller buildings relatively quickly, or at the very least, they can damage them to the point they can be captured by the 40 inhabitants of the tower, which, it's worth remembering, are also given protection by the tower themselves. This makes them incredibly useful against archer civilizations, as your 40 units are effectively going to be immune to attack, and then you can hit back with crush damage even when the units inside don't offer any crush damage by themselves. Worth knowing. Now, to continue a theme from earlier, I've already mentioned how fishing boats can be garrisoned, but did you know that the same thing applies to rams? Now, this may be something that you think is obvious, but believe me, there are plenty of people that don't realise this is possible, and that's a shame, because if you fill your rams with infantry, it can be quite an incredible tactic. I mean, have you noticed that your opponent has lots of sword cavalry that, as your rams approach key buildings, just jump out to attack them? Well, this little trick will remedy that problem. You just fill them with spearmen, and then when the cavalry attempt to take down the ram, you ungarrison your troops, and they're going to make light work of the horsemen. Or, alternatively, you can use them, as I said in the thing, as an armoured personnel carrier. If you're coming under a constant barrage of archer or skirmisher fire, then this trick will work just the same. You fill the rams with soldiers, and that gives you the advantage of the protection offered by the rams, as they're basically impervious to pierce attacks, and once you've reached the archers, you unload some swordsmen or champions, and you cut them down in no time. And so we reach the final trick. And this is something that's fairly basic and obvious in many ways, but it's definitely still underused. Now, it'll take a little bit of explaining, but if you want to build farms really efficiently, then there's a sneaky way to ensure that you lose not even 1 second in inefficiency, and it relies on using the farmers that you already have. Now, as you should be aware, you can use Shift to queue up actions. And what's also true is that farming never ends, so any tasks set to be carried out after a citizen finishes farming will never be undertaken, as they never finish farming. Now what this means is that if you want to train some citizens and for them to start building a farm immediately upon completion, you can use your current farmers to set the foundation, and then you can use your CC's muster point to point to the farm centre. This means that as soon as the units spawn, they'll get straight on with building the farm and then farming it. This leaves absolutely zero idle time, which means you're able to focus your attention elsewhere, and that's a nice little time saver. And those were my top 5 hidden tricks to supercharge your game. So let me know in the comments if you have any others, and if not, then I still think you should like, subscribe and do all those sort of things, as I'm now approaching 1500 subs, and I'm going to do something pretty special when I hit that number. Now exactly what that is, I've not yet decided, so maybe you also want to start thinking about what sort of things that may be. Anyway, that's quite enough homework for you, so I'll bid you farewell. Obrigado e adeus.